Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Your Podcast. I got another interview for you today. I got to sit down with director Mykee Morettini to talk about his new movie Evil Everywhere. Mykee had kind of been playing around with movies, loved the horror genre, just kind of always filming something with his friends, always acting things out. And he wanted to do kind of a throwback, kind of pay homage to the Halloween movies or the horror movies he grew up on, which would be that of the 80s. And you could see that he really went out of his way to stylize the picture and do things that kind of call back to the days of renting these on worn out VHS tapes. It's kind of cool the way he processed the picture to get that feel, and it does come across in his final product. So we kind of talked his creative journey, his process, his inspirations. So I hope you enjoy. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Was Your Podcast. I'm sitting down with Mykee Morettini to talk about his newest movie, Evil Everywhere. How you doing, Mykee?
I'm doing all right, thanks.
Thanks for taking the time to come on. This should be fun.
Yeah.
Before we get to Evil Everywhere, I like to ask creative people to go all the way back to the beginning of their creative journey and, kind of tell everyone what your spark was.
I grew up pretty much as soon as I could walk or talk. I kind of felt like I knew what I wanted to do in terms of being a filmmaker, actor, musician, artist. I gravitated to all that stuff before anything else. My dad was an actor. His name is Mykee Morettini, and he was an actor. And my mom at the time, when I was born, was a working seamstress in theater. So I grew up in a household where like acting and theater and stuff like that was what my parents did. And I loved watching movies. And I think that after a while, I just kind of understood that actors act in movies, and that was something that I could potentially do when I grew up. And so I used to like look through the family VHS camcorder and film stuff. My dad would let me like look through the viewfinder, and I thought it was fascinating because I couldn't believe that this thing that my dad had could film movies of us kids. And then I just grew up, and as soon as I could, I got my own camera when I was in grade school, and that was like my whole life. So, pretty much just the arts in general has been just this all-encompassing, huge part of who I am.
That's awesome that you had such a clear idea at such a young age. It
Yeah.
feels like it'd give you a huge leg up.
I hope so. I don't know. I'm 29 now, and this is my first feature film, and I did it completely by myself with my own money. So this wasn't like a deal where I had a company backing me or a crew or anything. It was just like me, a camera, a dream, and whatever money that I could spare over time. And that's why it took me quite a while to do. If I wasn't having to wrangle actors, I was having to kind of pay bit by bit as I could to get the effects and the wardrobe and the props and locations and all that stuff. I mean, I'm really just determined to do this stuff on a bigger and bigger and bigger scale. I love it. I mean, even when I'm not expecting anything in return, it's still like the first priority in my life is just to create.
That's awesome. I love that. I feel like everyone, even if you're like an accountant or something, you should have some kind of creative outlet. I just think it's good for your brain.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're innately creative beings. And I think some people think that art is silly. I think art is the most beautiful, natural, and one of the most important things that we can have. Because look at us in the pandemic. A lot of us are sitting around and binge watching things and listening to music. What would the world be without the arts and entertainment? It can be such a helpful tool and way to explore, I guess, yourself and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with you. Definitely. Um, Going back to the beginning a bit, you said your dad is an actor and your mom was working as a costumer.
Yeah.
Was it the fact that your parents were into it where you just kind of thought like, oh, cool, that's a natural progression or do that? Or do you remember if there was like a specific movie or maybe a couple movies that were like, oh, dad does that and this exists, like I have to go there.
That was the case. It wasn't like I never was trying to follow them. It just seemed so natural. I loved movies. I loved to pretend, and I was a very imaginative kid. So basically, my brother and I would kind of run around the house playing out stories anyway as little tykes. And naturally, just I realized that Back to the Future, all these movies that I liked, at the time were things that people acted in and filmed. And it just seemed like I just kind of had this rudimentary understanding that that's what I wanted to do. And if I didn't have a camera, I would still kind of act out the movies. And I would say to my brother, like, no, this is a new scene. Now we're over here. So like I was even directing back then at age like 3 or 4.
Really
And then
structured play.
yeah, kind of, because it had its own logic. I remember being at recess in grade school, like age 7 or 8, um, playing Titanic out in the schoolyard with the girls in my class, and we'd all pretend like we're falling off the Titanic when it sinks, and I would be like, "No, wait a second, that's unrealistic." So I always had like this direction in me where I wanted the stories to play out a certain way. And yeah, it if it wasn't film, it was like art or music or something else. I think that they're all really like good at different times. I guess some things are better said through music, some things are better said through art or film. So yeah.
You throw writing into the mix too, I'm guessing?
I don't really enjoy writing that much because I
Oh,
think it's activating that part of my brain that tends to overthink, and I think that the natural creative flow is better when I'm just sort of like not questioning myself too much. Um, Part of the struggle as a filmmaker sometimes is convincing myself to write scripts because I have the ideas are so palpable inside of my head, but I feel like sometimes when I've sat down to write it out, that logical side of my brain is triggered where it goes, hey, that doesn't make sense, or wait a second, is this a good idea? And I think the ideas themselves, while they're existing up in my head, are so detailed and so the way I want them to be, that sometimes I feel like it's easier to just have those ideas and forego the writing process and just find a way to translate that directly onto film. I know there's a lot of filmmakers who are really great writers, but I've never considered myself much of a writer. And writing is more of a means to an end to have a coherent film.
yeah, that's interesting that that's a part of the process you're not so into just because it seems, I mean, I'm an outsider, of course, but it seems so necessary to the process.
Yeah.
It's an interesting take.
Yeah. I think that I'm more of a sporadic, you know, kind of thinker or sporadic creator. I think David Lynch says stuff about this a lot, how it's like you shouldn't be forcing your creative ideas. They kind of come to you and you're supposed to articulate that something, some way, write it down or something, and let it naturally kind of snowball and become something more. And sometimes I guess the more tedious aspects of the process, like writing, it just feels like it's kind of a slow burn for me. Sometimes it's been hard to get the visions to translate into words, which is why I turned to the arts in the first place, because there was a lot of complex uh, conceptual things going on inside of me as a kid that I didn't know how to verbalize. So
Okay.
yeah, it was just easier to kind of like express myself through art and these little movies and things. And of course, once I got my camera when I was 8 years old, I was filming a lot of just random stuff, basically. And that became like the basis of my friend situation. Was just I'd have friends over and we just make movies. And if they didn't want to make movies, they'd go hang out with my brother. But I kind of got hyper focused on the movies, you know.
All right, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just I feel like at a young age the writing thing might have been more accessible because you just need, you know, a pen, paper, or a
Yeah.
keyboard. But since you managed to buy your own camera at such a young age, I guess you just kind of went right for the fun parts.
Yeah. Just making things up because I'd never used a camera before. And so I kind of figured it out as I went along. And that's the thing, is that everything that I do is self-taught. So it's all just kind of from messing around and not trying to be too logical about it, because I think when that kind of side of it takes over, I can start to get in my own way creatively. And I think it's just a little bit of a balance.
That overthinking trap.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people get into that trap too with the creative process, where they're saying they have like a writer's block or something. And I think it's kind of more so that it's a matter of overthinking or kind of thinking yourself into a corner. You need to kind of back away from it and then naturally come back to it. At least I do. That's my kind of thought about it.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that because I've heard that in other places. Like I'll listen to a
Mhm.
lot of interviews or podcasts with either filmmakers or writers or, you know, things of that nature. And a lot of
Yeah.
the writers, script, book, whatever, they always say, like, at some point it has to be finished. Like, you have to stop editing and re-editing and re-editing and
Yeah.
re-editing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I'll usually take a rough draft script uh, to the actual final product. Like I will just use that script, and if I have any notes, I'll kind of write them in pen on the side. Like a lot of my films, I would say, even Evil Everywhere, employs a lot of uh, improvisation by the actors. So I always tell people like the lines that I write, this is basically what you need to communicate. If you need to say it in your own way, say it in your own way. Unless there's like a very specific line I need read verbatim, I usually let the actors take artistic liberties with the dialogue. And I'm only really concerned about the energy and the flow and the emotions of it and more of the visual aspect. And I think the words themselves aren't as important to me.
Yeah, that's a kind of a cool approach, and I'm sure that the actors kind of get into that because they get a lot more creative freedom.
Yeah, and uh, I like to give the actors something that they can bring of themselves to the projects because for this movie, everybody was acting for free. There was no budget. I wasn't paying anyone. I wasn't being paid. So I like to have it be a very communal, collaborative experience as much as I can. We can find a way to serve my vision, but also allow that creative freedom with the actors, like that's my essential intention behind what I do.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that approach. I like the idea that here's the intent of the scene, here's the information, have
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah. And we'll do a couple of takes, and a lot of the time, the things that the actors come up with might even be 10 times better than what I've written. And I think that there's a natural process where I've seen actors do take after take after take, and they'll just get better and better. Like the flow, the energy, the emotion will just get better and better and better. And then I might do an extra take where somebody said a completely different line. But I think in the case with Evil Everywhere, I was also working on really restrictive time schedules because I had actors showing up for free and they needed to be gone by a certain hour. So I had to kind of schedule things like, all right, we're going to get through this scene today. We're going to get through these scenes all today, back to back. So we would have to kind of like rush through things. And I've talked about this before previously on a different interview, how I had to really make the best of the time that I was given because I couldn't have full control over every aspect of the production with no budget and working with just actors, friends, whoever was showing up. It was a matter of like really balancing between like doing justice to my vision and also being weary of the time and not keeping anybody over or making them come back day after day after day. I know that certain actors had to be done by a certain date, and that meant that I needed to, wrap their scenes. And
Yeah.
so that was a kind of a fun challenge. It was a little bit stressful because it didn't allow me to do as many retakes as I wanted. But it was kind of fun and kept the energy moving quickly when I was kind of filming many things back to back. It was that urgency of like, we need to finish this scene now and we need to move on and get these things. And so, and it literally, like most of the time, it was like me holding a camera and the boom mic mounted on top of the camera. And as a result, we were filming in windy climate, and a lot of the audio had to be chopped and pieced together from different takes to get a clear audio take, or it had to be ADR, which I think adds to the kind of cheesy dubbed foreign horror movie approach that I was going for.
I could see that because it definitely had that tone and vibe of the mid '80s when the movie's set.
Yeah. And that's all intentional. And I tried to give it the impression that it was kind of like just a crappy sort of B movie from the mid to late 80s. And like that meant sort of editing and doing the audio design in sort of a way that was campy and cheesy sounding.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of cuts in the film where there's like a jump cut or there's like a weird like static sort of awkward cut, and that was just kind of my way of trying to make it seem like it was an analog film, that was badly spliced together. So little things like that kind of added to the overall intention behind what I was doing, and I think that it made it a little more easy to be lax about things like the audio not being perfect, because this was just like me, maybe a friend on the side holding a boom mic, and then some actors. Uh, and that was like the extent of most of the scenes. But I had to do what I had to do to get it done. And I think that it's kind of a cool testament to just persisting, even when you don't have the ideal circumstances or resources, is just like finding some sort of way to get it done, even if it means like it comes out a little bit janky. You at least do your best and just keep going, I guess, because we can't always wait for the right opportunities. We have to sometimes just make the opportunity out of what's present.
Yeah, that perfect time never comes.
Yeah, it's just now's the perfect time, and you do what you can. And there's nobody standing on the sidelines going, "Mykee, when are you going to finish this movie?" It was my decision to make this movie. So as long as I knew that I could finish it at some time, it was just like, I'm going to do the best I can. We're going to shoot this however we can. I'm going to use whatever locations I am able to get. And if I need extra help, I'm going to get that along the way. But I'm not going to worry about figuring everything out up front because it's a process. And even if it took about 2 years to make, I understood that like I couldn't control when people were available or not, so I had to work with their availability and just do it. It's going to be a different story when people are being paid and there's a budget behind this. But I think given what this was, I'm pretty happy with it actually in the end, and just knowing what I went through to get certain shots and scenes and then looking at it, and it's just, I don't know, I find it funny. I kind of think there's a story behind every scene.
The story you're telling now of your just pure determination making it happen, I think, is really inspiring to a lot of people who listen to other creators because they want to be a creator.
Yeah.
And the things you're telling them is like, just do it. You can do it.
Yeah, really. That's all I can say is that even like I follow other creators as well, and I see them kind of perpetuate these narratives of like, you need to go out there and tackle it. You need to go up and like, get a budget and all this stuff, and you need a line producer. And I'm like, you don't though, dude. You just need a camera. You need a camera, and you need people who are cool and will help you create things. I tend to say to people, if you can go stand in front of the camera and read lines or pretend in front of a camera, we can make some awesome movies. And that's all I really ask for is people with good spirits who want to get on board and create magic, I guess.
That's definitely a common theme that comes up in a lot of these interviews that I've been doing is we're at a point now where the accessibility to be able to make your own movie, it's never been easier equipment wise.
Yeah, equipment wise, but then that we also just need to work together and make it happen. Because I think if you're doing vlogs and stuff like that, that's one thing. You can just sit in the room by yourself and do it. But I think that something like this, that's film, making an actual narrative film, it does require just like this level of trust where everybody on board is like, okay, even if we're not being paid, this is a cool idea and we're on board and we're going to see it through. And I did have a lot of actors that flaked out on production, and I thought that was kind of lousy because it's like, stand in your integrity. Like, don't say yes if you don't mean yes. Don't put everybody else out waiting on you to show up and then you flake just because you don't think that it's worth your time, because then you've disadvantaged other people. You've made us wait around for nothing. And so I had to encounter that a couple of times on the shooting of this movie and recast certain parts. And of course, I didn't know any actors or other creative people to be helping out with this kind of stuff. So I had to kind of go from scratch, put up casting calls, do auditions, and cast from people that I knew already in my life. So whatever it took, yeah. I mean, just if you have people and you've got a camera on your phone, just go shoot stuff. Don't worry about what it takes to be a filmmaker. Just make the film, and voila, you're a filmmaker.
Right.
And you're not gonna be perfect up front. Like I watch this movie and I'm like, oh god, like some of these shots, I know I could do so much better now because it's been 3 years since I wrapped this film. But yeah, don't beat yourself up. Just keep doing it. You're naturally going to get better as you go along.
Yeah, I did want to ask because you said that you're all self-taught and this is your first feature. So was this kind of your film school or your film boot camp?
I already went to film school. I graduated a year before I made this film.
Oh, okay. I thought you said you were self-taught at one point. I'm sorry.
I was self-taught. I went to film school in my mid-20s because I just wanted to. I wanted to meet people.
Cool.
I grew up in Lake Bluff, Illinois. I didn't really know anybody else my age. If I did have friends from high school, they all dispersed and went elsewhere. So I was kind of kicking around in this town where I had no friends and I wanted to make movies. And I thought, let me go to film school and I can connect with other filmmakers, resources, and get this next level of opportunity. And it just seemed like the most logical thing to do. And I graduated in 2016. I made a couple of short films after that. And then I decided to just do a feature film because I was like, why not? I like this idea. I like doing 80s horror films. Let me just do a full film.
Okay. That is cool. Yeah. That's a really logical go get the connections more than the education.
Yeah. Uh, and it worked to a degree. I mean, I have to make new connections right now. I've moved, and some of those connections are not connected anymore. So where I am now, I'm working from zero as well. I'm building up a network again, and I think there's naturally you're going to do that as you go on through this process and through your life, and as you work on different things, you're not always going to have the same connections and the same resources available, and it just kind of requires patience and trust again, just to be able to build something again from scratch.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I definitely wanted to ask you about, very specific to the movie, and I try not to get too specific because I don't want to give spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but it's in the very beginning. It feels like a sequel.
It is a sequel.
Okay. To one of your shorts?
It's a sequel to a short of mine called Paratuto.
Okay.
And the intro to the film is a recap of the events of that film because I didn't know how else to do this.
Yeah.
It is a sequel. Originally, this was going to be a trailer sequel. The original one was a trailer. In the vein of Grindhouse trailers, all those fake movie trailers that they did in between the features. And I did that trailer in 2014 and then ended up going to film school, graduated in 2016, and then made a bunch of other short films all along the way. And when it came time around 2017, where I was making this film, I decided I'm going to make this a full film and it's going to be a sequel. And it might be kind of odd, but I'll try my best to recap it at the beginning and make it play as its own thing. Yeah, it's kind of a
yeah. It kind of gave me those vibes like when you used to go to Video World or Blockbuster or whatever you had near you when you were younger, and you just picked something based on the cover art.
Yeah.
And it might have been a sequel and you had no idea.
Oh,
there
yeah.
wasn't a 2 in the title.
Yeah, and it also lends itself to the fact that a lot of Italian horror films like low-key are a sequel to another film you've never heard of, but when they get brought overseas to America, they get retitled. So I'm kind of going for that thing as well, where it's like, this could be like Zombie 5 or something. You don't know. Like, I wanted to give it that really strange sort of uncanny valley kind of sense about it, where it's like it's sort of out of time and out of space and just a weird sort of surreal nature about it. And I think that kind of unintentionally, that kind of it being a sequel sort of added to that vibe.
Yeah, that kind of missing link sequel, like you were saying.
Yeah, like you don't know, is this a real thing or is this like a satire? And that's a big part of a lot of what I do, is this sort of like, it almost feels like it's a snapshot from another universe of something from the 80s that you've never heard of, and you're only just discovering it now. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely intentional.
Right. Did you pick 80s horror just out of a love for 80s horror? Because you were born after the 80s.
Yeah, I was born in the 90s, but I love the 80s. And it's my favorite decade of music and film. And as a teenager, when I was getting into horror films, I got really interested in all the classic slasher films, the Italian horror films, all the B movies. I love trauma films. So a lot of this film was like paying homage to trauma and that sort of crazy outsider sort of film that just really kind of pushes the limits. And a lot of B movies and stuff really inspired me to be a filmmaker, because I would hear the stories about how low budget it was and how people like Sam Raimi had to really push through while filming The Evil Dead. And it took him about 2 years from start to finish to complete. and he lost a lot of actors during production. And I used to hear stuff like that as a teenager, and I'd go, "Oh, wait a minute! Like that's awesome! Like I want to be like that," because I was like, I could do that.
Yeah.
Uh, so naturally, like all of those influences just came together in this film, and to the point where like I had to slap myself on the wrist and say, "Don't put it all in one basket. Like save some of your ideas for a different film. Don't put everything into this film." So I did have a lot of fun just like paying homage to all this different stuff and making this some sort of crazy surreal hodgepodge of horror and fantasy and sci-fi.
Mentioning trauma, I definitely got that vibe about the gore effects that you had.
Yeah.
Like they were very well done and all practical, which I always appreciate, especially in a horror movie. Um, did you do those effects, or did you find an effects person?
No, I did those effects. So
Nice
this was
job.
another, thank you very much. This was another learning experience. I did a lot of VFX, like digitally and After Effects, and then there's a lot of practical gore effects, and a good blend of both. And I did have one sequence towards the end that involves this sort of electric. I don't know how to say it. Electricity is sort of like wrapping around a character, and I did outsource that effect. But that's the only thing that I had somebody else do. And I told them I want it to look like at the end of Hellraiser, where the Lamont configuration shoots out the sparks and it gets all over the Cenobites, and they kind of it's that pixelated sort of like animation, that cell animation. I was like, if we're going to do digital effects in this film, it's got to look like crappy matte paintings and practical effects.
Yeah.
Because like I just wanted this whole thing to seem like it's an authentic 80s horror film. So like everything I did, I was sort of like reverse engineering it. Like, how would they have done this back then? And instead of like things like Stranger Things that are filmed in a very modern way, but they're set in the 80s, I like to shoot it in a very 80s B movie way and set it in the 80s as well and try to make it seem like it's authentic. I don't know if you've ever heard of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, but that was a British series that did that same thing, where it kind of sold itself as being an actual 1980s horror fantasy show. But of course, it was produced in the 2000s.
Okay, I see what you're talking about. I actually have heard of that. I hadn't seen it though, but I get exactly what you were going for because I did see like on your footage. While the screener that I got anyway was in 1440p, so you shot it super high def.
Yeah,
it had all of the added effects and like the color was like a little warped in some scenes, or you put like artifacting over it.
Yeah. Exactly. So I did that. It was like it's one thing to color grade, but my intention behind the grading was I'm going to grade it and then I'm going to warp the grading so it looks like the color timing was off, like as if the film developer kind of messed up in certain areas. You see that a lot when you watch like crappy old films, like what is that one that cop one? Oh, Samurai Cop. You know, like scene to scene, clip to clip, there'll be like different color tones. Like suddenly it's all orangey, and suddenly it looks like all grainy for no reason. So it was just like really studying that sort of stuff and doing my best to replicate that, like that analog imperfection, because I love that. I think it looks beautiful. I think it really serves the overall vibe that I was going for. And I think that were I to have shot it to be like really pristine and perfect, it wouldn't have that same effect.
It would definitely take you out of the 80s.
Yeah. And that my intention with this is first of all is to be funny, but in a way where it seems grounded within the world of the film itself, as if the humor is more so coming from the campiness of it all rather than any character kind of looking at the audience and going, "What's up with this?" You know, because you could definitely do that in horror comedy. You could have it be very meta and like self-referential and satirical. But I think for me, what was going to make this one work is just try to play it straight and making it just ridiculous, but playing it very serious.
For sure, yeah. You can't to do a farce. You can't make fun of what you're doing. If I'm wording that right?
Yeah, it's like I made this out of love. I love 80s horror films. I love B movies. So there's no point in this movie where like my intention was to look at the audience and go like, "Hey, pretty crazy, right?" It was more like I'm going to play this straight. It's going to be like you're watching some sort of strange Italian horror film that's been badly dubbed, and they didn't try to make it funny. It just ends up being funny because it's sort of wooden and strange. And there are scenes that kind of come out of nowhere and you're like, what is this about? But yeah, just like playing it very sincere, I think.
Yeah,
Somebody,
that's what I meant. I didn't mean farce as like an insult to you by any means.
oh no, I didn't take it that way. But yeah,
Okay.
somebody that watched it once said to me, there's no like pretense behind it. They're like, it's just, it is what it is. Like, it's not trying to be funny. It just like ends up being kind of funny in like a weird way. And another person said that it was a good movie to like drink some beers and laugh at. And I'm like, oh, that's the idea. Like, I love The Room and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I definitely was aiming for all of that.
And that's like what, going back to Trauma, that's what those movies were for. No one ever watched a Trauma movie thinking it was going to win an Academy Award. They watched it with
Right.
their friends because it was fun.
Right. And they knew what they were doing too. They never tried to be anything other than what they were trying to be.
Yeah, and then later on, they even would self-deprecate their own movies.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
uh,
And yeah, somewhere down the line, it might be fun to kind of build my own little universe of movies and tie things together. I think that's kind of an intention would be to do some sort of sequel to this and make it more, a little bit more self-referential, perhaps. Turn up the comedy.
Kind of have your characters cross-pollinate and stuff.
Yeah. I think
Yeah, for
that'd
sure.
be awesome. I love that Kevin Smith does that, and I'm also a big Kevin Smith fan, so I think
Hmm.
that's definitely on the agenda for me.
Nice. Yeah, it's all about universe building now. Everything's a
Yeah.
universe.
Oh yeah.
The other question I wanted to ask is because you mentioned pretty early on in our conversation that you were also into music. Did you do the music for the movie as well?
Yeah, I did the theme song and a lot of key music cues. And then I got so overwhelmed with everything else I was having to do by myself. So towards the end of post, I was just having friends of mine contribute things. So there's like four different composers, maybe, or four or five different composers listed. And then
Wow.
whatever I didn't make myself, there's some vocal tracks in the film. So that was like stuff that was Creative Commons and like available for usage, freely in commercial work. And I checked the licenses and everything. I wanted to make sure that everything that you see in here is like cleared and doesn't require any sort of license. And I had a very specific sound that I wanted. So if I wasn't creating it myself, I was outsourcing it to friends and describing to them the nature of the scenes, or just rendering out these little video clips and sending it to them so they could score along the edit.
Yeah, the score, maybe even more than all the look you did in After Effects, really nails the era.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I'd say I started to do these synth compositions for my own films back around high school. I think like 2009 or 10. Because I was making 80s style horror films back then with the same sort of, authentic, grainy, grimy look. And so I noticed that the available production music that I could find online for free didn't have the vibe that I wanted. I love John Carpenter's soundtracks. I love the soundtrack to The Terminator, that very obviously synthesizer sound. And I wanted to figure out how to do that myself. So I started messing around in these various DAWs, like Acoustica Mixcraft and, you know, GarageBand and Logic Pro. And over the years, I just started getting into the habit of composing my own scores for my films. But then with this film, it kind of became, I was putting too much on my own plate. And I was like, all right, I don't think I could score everything while I'm shooting this and editing and doing all this other stuff. So I was like, I'll score some of it. And then, if you guys could help out, that'd be great. So I had a friend come over with his Juno 60, I think, this vintage Roland Juno synth. And he just did a couple of incidental music tracks that run in between the scenes and give it kind of a Twin Peaks vibe, because I was really, really into Twin Peaks when I was making this, and The Return had just aired. So
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, nice.
what? Yeah.
All right. You want to tell everybody where and when they can find your movie?
Yeah, it should be on Amazon, and I'm sure it's on the Wild Eye website on May 25th. And
Awesome.
I believe it'll be on on demand streaming and all that.
Perfect. And you want to tell everybody where they can find more of you online, your socials or whatever you want to plug?
Yeah, sure. You could go to www.youtube.com/Mordacious Instagram.com/MoonBearStarTiger. That's one word. And you could go to MykeeMorettini.com, because I like to give people a one-stop place where all of my extraneous links are just there.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to come on. I think it's really inspirational that you just found a way to get a little bit of money, pay for the movie piece by piece, get it done over time, and you just made it happen.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Mykee one more time for coming on the show to talk to us about his new movie, Evil Everywhere, out now on VOD. Check it out on whatever VOD platform you prefer. We have a lot more interviews, a lot more new movie coverage, talking to comic creators, some unboxings coming up. So make sure you like and subscribe. You're not going to want to miss out. More cool stuff coming your way. Also, make sure you listen to Subwizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. SubwizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, merchandise, videos, and more. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments, leave us something on social media. All of our accounts can be found after the show and in the show notes. And don't forget, Subwizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you get multiple monthly bonus shows. On a more personal note, I'd like to remind everybody that a good friend and I released a comic book at the beginning of this year. It's an ongoing series called Social Studies. Social Studies is a slice-of-life comedy comic about the high school experience and all the ridiculousness that goes along with it. You can check that out at socialstudiescomic.com. Thanks.